And welcome to the Dragon's Lair. That was the Motor City Madman. And by the way, this is Renegade Broadcasting, the best source for factual information on the planet. And I thought that was the most appropriate song for all of the circumstances that we've been dealing with of the last week and just anything else in general at the moment. And by the way, that was the first person I ever saw in concert, at least a rock concert anyway. Saw him in January of 1977. That was the Ted Nugent album. He had not come out with any of this other stuff like Wango, Z-Tango, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So anyway, the biggest rock supporter of Second Amendment rights. He spends a lot of his time here in Texas. I don't know why he just doesn't move here. He may hang out in northern Michigan. If he does, well, then I can understand that. So anyway, tonight's show is going to be about a little bit more about gun control and the lies about it, and the lies about the gun control issues that you hear about the National Socialist. Oh, they're a bunch of gun grabbers. And then we're also going to talk a little bit about the South and secession issues. And so I would like to consider this sort of a continuation of the theme of Mike's March 21st show. And by the way, he is doing a phenomenal job. And the last few shows he's done, give this man a standing ovation and a round of applause. He's just kicking ass. And I'm sure he will continue. So anyway, before we get started here, again, be sure and give all the other hosts here on Renegade a listen. Call on Mondays to be determined, or Wildcard Tuesdays with a guest host or a possible regular host filling in. Will on Wednesdays, Mike on Thursdays, clap, 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 clap. Lou on Fridays, Roundtable on Saturdays, and me, of course, on Sundays. For the record, today is March 24th. 2013 on our screwed up Christian calendar. Today the sun is at 3 degrees Aries. We've finally gotten out of Pisces. Hold on, I have to cough a second. Okay. Mercury went direct last Sunday, but not be back to where it was when it went retrograde until April 5th, which just is around the corner. However, things should be starting to return to some sense of normalcy. Again, additionally, I still have a solar arc Mars conjuncting my natal ascendant. Will be for a few weeks to come. And the solar arc Saturn transit conjuncting my descendant is starting to set in. More on that at a later time. Hopefully, I'll be getting to the astrology show here pretty soon now that Mercury has gone direct. And I may wait till it gets past the point where it went retrograde. We'll see. A lot of things lately are just kind of changing at a moment's notice. So I'm just going to start playing everything by ear for a little while. Okay, I want to monitor the chat and I may glance at it during music breaks. And again, I'll be drinking my water and smoking here, so I may look in there during those music breaks. Let's see here. We have a chat at renegadebroadcasting.com, and I believe we have a live feed tonight. Another chat room location is renegadebroadcasting.chitango.com. And, of course, we have Kyle's social network, alternativesocial.com. There's a chat over there. And if you have not joined, why not? And I want to, again, bring to everyone's attention the nationalprotectionism.com website. And we need to get everybody active and stay focused and continue to stay active. Don't let up. This is not a time for slacking off. There will be no phone calls tonight. As usual, there's just way too much to cover. If you want to contact me, you can send an email to magus_1818 at geocities.com, and that's magus_18 at geocities.com. If you want to subscribe, just put subscribe in the subject, or just write me and tell me what you think. And some of the emails I've been getting lately have been rather interesting. I like hearing from people on their thoughts. And I'll bring that up in just some issues on that in just a second as well. I want to mention here at the moment, oh, by the way, I may or may not be able to get around to answering your emails. The subject of architecture, I think what I'm going to do for right now, I don't want to put that on the back burner, but there's a lot of other issues that I think are more important. So what I think I'm going to do with the architecture topic, I'm going to go ahead and do that on my own Blog Talk account, and I'll announce it when that will occur. And there's also been some recent issues that have come up that I've had to deal with that I would like to add to on that. So that should be rather interesting when I do get around to doing that, but it will be sometime pretty soon. And my cat is with me tonight, right at the moment. She's under the computer table. Now, also, I had mentioned in my very first show some issues I was going to try to cover, and I'll still try to get to them, and I've knocked some of those off the list, but I'll run through them again. I still want to do a racial timeline in the early U.S. history till 1860, something on Freemasonry in general, Anton LaVey and fake Satanism. I just did something on Albert Pike here recently, but I want to do a little bit more, as well as kind of bring up the topic of the Scottish Rite and also the KKK, which did come up again here recently on Kyle's last show on Monday. And again, I do intend to cover more various aspects of U.S. history coming up, and that is sorely lacking in most of us, as we were poorly educated and fed so much false information. And also some issues regarding National Socialism, in particular how it is not like socialism related to communism. Okay. Now, somebody had written me here and asked me a few questions about some issues, and I'm going to go ahead and read these on the air. Some reason I can't seem to get my throat clear. Hold on just one second. Okay, maybe that'll work. They gave me a list of about 10 items here, and I just kind of want to run through them and talk a little bit about them here. They're interested in hearing something on the background of the founding fathers of the U.S. and what exactly they had in mind. Yeah, I want to get to that at some point in the near future. Also, they are interested in the Crusades and the history of the Templars. Who were they? What was their mission, etc.? And did they have a direct link on modern Freemasonry? Yes, they did. And I'll try to cover something on that. They were also wondering about my take on ancient megalith buildings and their purpose and perhaps what was behind the building of these sites. Also, too, my speculation on who exactly were the ancient Egyptians. And let's see here. Are you of the contention that the ancient Hebrews or Jews stole much of their material and so-called spiritual wealth out of Egypt and bastardized it? Yes, they did. And if you go to my show 1 that I did here on Renegade and follow the instructions on how to get to some of my previous presentations, you will hear some of that discussed. However, it will be brought up again. Let me take another drink here. Hold on just one sec. I think what's happened here is I've had to turn my heater back on because we had another little cold wave come through here. It's supposed to be spring, but as usual, we usually get some cool front come in and mess it all up. So I have to turn all the air conditioners off and go back to the heaters. And so I think the heater's drying the air up in the room, and that's affecting my voice a little bit. Another question they asked was, what do you make of Joseph Davidovit's theory of building the pyramids of Egypt using fake or man-made conglomerate stones, which also might explain the desertification of the Sahara? Yeah, that would be an interesting subject to discuss. Also, who was Hiram Abiff in the origins of Freemasonry? And also, do I agree with Dennis Fetcho regarding how continental masonry was different from the European version, along with the ancient Scottish Rite? What do you make of the English/Hermetic Kabbalah? Yeah, that'll be something that we can discuss in the future. And the last 2 items are Francis Bacon and John Dee. Yeah, and I will definitely get to those at some point. So anyway, what I want to go ahead and do here, I want to mention one other subject, and I may do this on the next show. I want to discuss the word Aryan, and I'm going to define what it means and just general information on it, because I want to get it clarified. And something came up here yesterday, so I thought I would discuss it. It just wasn't in my plans for tonight. So anyway, what I have coming up first, I'm going to play a song, and then after that, I want to discuss guns, and I have an audio clip from a militia leader on a speech that he gave to his local militia. So we'll be right back after this message from Queensryche. Okay, I'm back. Now what I've got here is a clip of a YouTube video, and on the video it was just simply audio of his speech where he addressed his local militia. But I was really impressed with what J.B. Campbell had to say, and I think there's some important messages that he gave in that speech that I think everybody here really needs to pay attention to, and to perhaps do what you need to do on your end to make sure that you are prepared for whatever circumstances that may arise. So anyway, this is about 21 minutes long. Pay attention closely, and everything he says is worth listening to. So here we go.
But who is it, besides the rabid dogs in the Obama administration, that wants us disarmed? Well, the United Nations wants us disarmed. Communist China wants us disarmed. The Israel lobby wants us disarmed. And, of course, the Mexican drug cartel wants us disarmed. These are the international gangsters. They have requested? No, they have demanded that the Obama gangsters disarm us. It's quite possible that a belligerent meeting such as this is what the Obama gangsters want. It's quite possible that we are being pushed and goaded into violent responses to their violent provocations, such as the sadistic police behavior we've seen all over the country. So what? They mean to enslave all of us and kill some of us. We're going to have to fight back sooner or later, regardless of whom it pleases or displeases. It's either fight or start waving the white flag, and I doubt that anyone in here is ever going to wave the white flag. Nope, we'll fight it out and see who wins. I'm pretty sure it's going to be us. There's no doubt that many police departments are encouraged to brutalize us civilians. There is no denying that many police departments have been trained in Israel or are being trained by visiting Israeli instructors in this country. Anyone can see where this is leading. It is leading to a totalitarian dictatorship, but only if the dictatorship can get us to hand over our guns. So it doesn't matter what the Obama gangsters think they want. What matters is what we want. What matters is what are we going to do about it. We pay the bills and we'll make the decisions. Anyone who's hoping there's a safe, legal, and peaceful way to hold on to his guns is going to be disappointed. Gun control is about who is going to run this country, us or the foreign gangsters. We're not sure, of course, but it's possible that Obama himself is a foreign gangster. We're still waiting on the ID. If it's going to be us, then we need to be ready at the drop of a hat to fight like wildcats. The threat we face ranges from a militarized police takeover of the Sheriff's Department to the Blackwater-type mercenaries we saw during Katrina, right up to full martial law run by the U.S. Army and or the United Nations. All of these would be run by the CIA front groups such as FEMA and Homeland Security. We've already seen the Army field manuals on occupation and concentration camps for American dissidents. As we've seen from the Vietnam, the Iraq, and Afghanistan disasters, some places cannot be successfully occupied by the U.S. or UN military, no matter how hard they try. Some can. such as Japan, South Korea, and West Germany, but some cannot. All thugs and bullies can be beaten because they're mainly into it for the money and the other bennies. It just takes guns and the guts to use them as they were meant to be used. We just need to get it into our heads that Teton County is one county in Idaho that will not be messed with or intimidated no matter what. As we see every day, over and over, the gangsters deal in horrific and merciless brutality, mainly overseas, but increasingly here at home. It's called state terror. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans object to state terror, whether it's mass murder by bombers or assassination by drones, bombing weddings and funerals, or sadistic grunts kidnapping, torturing, raping, and murdering anyone who might resent American brutality. The list of American terrorism around the world is too long for this meeting. Many of us have suspected that our military men and women have been trained in Iraq and Afghanistan to brutalize civilians over there is a prelude to do the same to civilians over here. This suspicion began with the infamous 45 questions for soldiers and Marines in 1994, and again just last week with the report that Obama's litmus test for generals keeping their jobs is their willingness to kill American resistors. The authors of American State Terror, the politicians and the killers, are the same gangsters who want us to hand over our guns to them. The government knows that America is in an explosive condition, thanks entirely to what the government has been doing to us, especially with 9/11 and its planned tyrannical aftermath known as the War on Terror. It has been waging the war on terror against foreigners in our name. The government has always planned to attack us Americans, and now it is doing so. The war on terror included the Patriot Act and the Military Commissions Act and the annual National Defense Authorization Act. The Patriot Act obliterated the Bill of Rights. The Fourth Amendment is no more. The Gang of Nine on the Supreme Court has found no constitutional problem with the Patriot Act or with any tyrannical action of the Bush and Obama gangsters. We're not going to be protected by anyone in any part of the federal, state, or local government. It is up to us to protect ourselves from the tyrants. It has always been up to us, but human nature being what it is, we have trusted our employees to take care of us. This was very bad judgment on our part. It was lazy, it was cowardly, and it was wrong. It is reasonable to expect them to join with us against the federal tyrants, but this is our responsibility. After all, we pay the bills. It is estimated by the government that there are between 300 and 400 million firearms in America today. There are more guns in America than there are cars, and guns don't tend to wear out. The only thing that stands in the way of a declaration of a totalitarian dictatorship by the Obama administration is this massive number of guns in our hands. And there is the historical fact that America came into being as a result of the violent overthrow of a totalitarian dictatorship. It was not done by the Americans fighting a foreign enemy. It was done by Englishmen fighting their own English government. When the fighting was over, the English rebels had become Americans. The government knows that it cannot disarm us physically. It is an impossibility. The next best thing is to disarm us mentally, psychologically. As the current Attorney General Holder admitted years ago in a different administration, he said, we need to be, speaking of us, we need to be brainwashed, that was his word, to give up our guns. I started the militia movement 30 years ago this year to counter the attempt by government to brainwash us to give up our guns. I think the movement was successful, at least to that extent. The militia movement was the biggest, fastest growing voluntary armed movement in American history. It came out of nowhere at a time much less dangerous than today. It collapsed from the shocking federal massacre at Oklahoma City in 1995. But 18 years later, we are mentally much tougher and more sophisticated than we were then. Federal atrocities still shock us, but they no longer make us doubt ourselves or the correctness of our duty. Thanks to the miracle of the internet and thanks to the power-mad overreach of the federal gangsters, millions of heavily armed Americans understand what we are about to experience, which is the naked, violent struggle between the tyrants and the normal people who only want to be left alone. The tyrants cannot leave us alone. They must control us without limit. Violence is the American way. It is our history and it is our way. The American tendency to violence has been exploited by the government in its genocidal wars against foreigners. The National Defense Authorization Act for last year authorized the arrest and disappearance of Americans in secret with no due process. The NDAA allows federal agents and the military to kidnap, torture, and murder Americans who are considered enemies of the state. Senator Carl Levin revealed last year that these tyrannical licenses to kidnap, torture, and murder us were placed in the NDAA on Obama's insistence. So now we are confronted with another attempt to outlaw assault rifles. Everyone in this room knows what an assault rifle really is. It's a machine rifle that goes fully automatic and fires an intermediate cartridge. Intermediate means that the brass is shorter and holds less gunpowder and creates a slower bullet velocity than a regular rifle cartridge. Examples are the AK-47 and the M16 and even the old American M2 carbine. Assault rifle, quote unquote, is now a politically motivated term of hatred, an attempt to make the gun owner appear aggressive and homicidal just by owning one. The term comes from the German original Sturmgewehr, or storm rifle, a word coined by Adolf Hitler to describe the first one, the STG-44. I kind of like the word, so I will use it tonight. Remember, a storm rifle is really not a storm rifle unless it can be fired full auto. We'll just pretend for now that we're talking about storm rifles and not their semi-automatic cousins that are legal to buy unless you live in Connecticut. Which brings up an interesting question. Anyway, we know that the feds aren't against storm rifles for everyone, just us. The president and the other politicians are surrounded by storm rifles and submachine guns for their own protection. That's because they work real good. The president supplies a storm rifle to every soldier and Marine he sends overseas to kill foreigners. Homeland Security just put out a request for bids on 7,000 actual full auto storm rifles. Except when the DHS wants some, they are renamed personal defense weapons. In our hands, they are known as assault weapons. Do we see how that works? The CIA has provided storm rifles and much more to the Al-Qaeda terrorists in Libya and Syria to overthrow those governments. It did the same thing to the Al-Qaeda rebels in Afghanistan in the 1980s, where the CIA and Zbigniew Brzezinski actually invented Al-Qaeda. The President and his Attorney General have provided thousands of civilian and military storm rifles to the Mexican drug cartels, which they used to kill, reportedly, thousands of Mexicans and even some Americans. Are the Mexicans in the drug cartels our friends or our enemies? The feds are conducting a war on drugs. This war has been a declared war by all presidents and funded by the Congress going back to Nixon. Can we assume, given that we are waging the war on drugs, that the drug cartel members would be considered our enemies? What is the definition of treason? It is to give aid and comfort to an enemy in time of war. We're in a declared war. Our leaders have given not just aid and comfort, but thousands of storm rifles to our enemy during this war, which the enemy used to slaughter thousands of Mexicans and also some Americans, to justify disarming us. It really doesn't get much more treasonous than that. What Obama and Holder did was not only treason, it was international terrorism, according to Title 22 U.S. Code. Okay, if you go to the CIA's website, it's called CIA.gov, you can get the CIA's definition of terrorism, which is, quote, the term terrorism means premeditated, politically motivated violence perpetrated against non-combatant targets by clandestine agents or groups. Continuing the quote, says the term international terrorism means terrorism involving the territory or the citizens of more than one country. Does that sound like Fast and Furious to you? I know, it also sounds like Panama, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Syria, and on and on. Tonight, though, we're just talking about gun control. But how revolting is it that these animals would provide storm rifles, which they bought with TARP bailout money, to the most sadistic, head-chopping murderers in Mexico, with orders to mow down thousands of Mexicans, merely to justify the annulment of the Second Amendment. These guys are really playing with fire in a desperate attempt to disarm us. They, along with the narco assassins, are remorseless killers. I have another definition of treason. Gun control is treason. Anyone and everyone in the gun confiscation food chain is a traitor to the people and the country, from the very top to the very bottom. We all know what the penalty for treason is. Anyone who would disarm us, take away our ability to defend ourselves, is our deadly enemy. It doesn't matter what his or her excuse is, it's an act of war against us. There's no legal or procedural method to stop a gun grabber. The official gun grabber, who means to strip you defenseless, can only be stopped with a gun. He's the most dangerous enemy we have because he's got a license to kill us. The license is good for any reason or for no reason at all. In Indiana, it's illegal to try to stop an official home invasion, even if there's no warrant, even if they've got the wrong house. I doubt this law will last long, along with the judge who dreamed it up. The best cure for official, warrantless home invasions is about 5 rounds of buckshot zinging down the hallway as they storm in, screaming obscenities and pounding on the walls. The fun and excitement will leak out of that sort of thing very quickly. This is America. America was founded in violence, and it runs on violence. The colonists tried for decades to obtain, in a peaceful manner, their freedom from the vicious, greedy English dictatorship. It was impossible. Change and freedom could only be obtained through violent revolution. The violent nature of America will never change. The bad guys always have guns. It's a fact of life. The worst guys have some of the most impressive guns. We know this because we paid for them. I'm talking about government gunmen. It is our sacred duty to defend ourselves and our loved ones from government gunmen who are at this very moment planning and devising ways to strip us defenseless and put us someplace where we're never heard from again. We might ask ourselves what these remorseless traitors have in store for us that first requires us to be disarmed. We've seen what they've done to others at Abu Ghraib, Bagram, Guantanamo, and in secret CIA torture centers all around the world. CIA and Army whistleblowers are being sent to prison for trying to warn us what is in store for opponents of the American warlords. Does anyone think we can trust torturers to be nice to us after we hand over our guns to them? We normal, decent Americans already have the necessary equipment to defend ourselves from government gunmen who want to disarm us. We've got all the guns we need. Ammunition is another matter. The current shortage of ammunition is a serious development. A first step is to encourage manufacturers to sell only to American civilians and not to the Department of Homeland Security or any agency of the federal government. These agencies are deliberately creating ammo shortages with their insane orders for billions of rounds. After all, we're paying the bills, so the ammo needs to go to us, the actual owners. Okay, so the subject tonight is gun control in Teton County. How should we respond if Feinstein's bill, or something like it, such as Obama's executive order, becomes law? Obviously, we will ignore it and continue to trade among ourselves and with other like-minded Americans. But what if confiscation becomes law? At that point, we start making changes. We, the ones who pay the bills, take over the law. Our law will become what used to be called frontier justice. Attempts at confiscation will receive the death penalty. We have no choice in this life and death matter. Anyone who would disarm us is our deadly enemy and must be put to death. We will not try to hide behind elected officials. We are responsible for everything, including our self-defense. We here in Teton County cannot expect a sheriff and a handful of deputies to fight federal gun grabbers for us, which is a preposterous idea. The sheriff and his deputies can certainly help us and are expected to do so, but we will take full responsibility for defending ourselves. We need to have secure communications with each other that will continue to function if cell towers or generators are turned off by man or nature. We must develop a standard procedure of immediate action in the event any county resident is attacked by gun grabbers. This is the essence of our new Neighborhood Watch program, our readiness to defend our fellow residents from federal attackers. This will also apply to any attempt at police or military roadblocks in Teton County. Travel is not a privilege, it is a natural right. Roadblocks will not be allowed to exist. There will also be no TSA or DHS aggression allowed or tolerated in the county. We now know that drones have been used against us here in the valley. So we encourage the shooting down of all these dangerous weapons at the first opportunity. Look up when you hear something overhead. We learned in the Rhodesian War that the safest way to travel through terrorist-infested areas was to have a convoy of at least 2 vehicles, several hundred yards apart. It will certainly come to that in many parts of America, but we must begin thinking in these terms even in Teton County.
Get a rope.
Okay, I'm back. I hope everybody got something useful out of that. And I don't think I could have said that any better, and that's why I decided to let him go ahead and speak. What I've got lined up here, again, I want to discuss the so-called gun grabbing by the National Socialist. And I've got some stuff on the secession coming up. And before I get into that, though, I want to mention, he discussed the American Revolution. Well, all of you have seen the flag that says, "Come and take it." And usually there's an image of an AR-15 or an AK-47 or a small 1800s cannon on it. Well, that flag originated in Gonzales, Texas, and goes back to the year 1835 when the Mexican government issued orders to confiscate weapons from Texans. And ultimately there was a battle that ensued. That flag was flown, and that led to the independence and the beginning of the Republic of Texas. And so there's a tradition in not only of America and the colonies, but also here in Texas. So anyway, what I want to move to next, there's a lot of quotes made by either Hitler or the National Socialists that are just outright lies. And I want to cover one in particular on Hitler and gun control. In a speech sometimes said to have been delivered in 1935, Hitler is supposed to have exclaimed, quote, "This year will go down in history. For the first time, a civilized nation has full gun registration. Our streets will be safer, our police more efficient, and the world will follow our lead into the future," end quote. This quote has been made popular with Americans who defend the constitutional right to keep and bear arms. It's cited to discredit those who support restrictions on firearms ownership and use. It's also cited to support the often made charge that Hitler and his government curtailed gun ownership in Germany and confiscated weapons held by private citizens. The truth is rather different. When Hitler and his National Socialist Party went into power in 1933, they inherited a somewhat restrictive firearms law that the liberal Democratic Weimar government had enacted 5 years earlier. In 1938, Hitler's government revised the earlier law by loosening those restrictions, thereby enhancing the rights of Germans to own weapons. The most thorough confiscation of firearms ever imposed on Germans was carried out at the end of the Second War by the occupation forces of the United States and other victorious Allied powers. I need to cough for a second. Hold on. So what I want to get to next here was something written by Dr. Pierce. And he had, I don't remember if he actually gave an audio presentation of this. I think it was just an essay that was written out, and the reason being is that he disproved these lies about Hitler and gun control, and he also demonstrated the evidence. He had copies of the actual German laws on the books, written in German, of course, along with all of the English translations of it included in the essay. And I did a big search trying to find any audio on this that I could find, and I could not find any. So this is very important for us to know, because obviously the people are going to say, well, if you defend the National Socialist Germany, and they'll use the term Nazi, of course, then they'll say, well, you're anti-weapons, or you're against the Second Amendment. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead. This is a real short, probably about 10 minutes. So let me go ahead and get through this, and we'll proceed forward after that. It's called Gun Control in Germany, 1928 through 45, by William L. Pierce. A common belief among defenders of the Second Amendment to the U.S. Constitution is that the National Socialist government of Germany under Adolf Hitler did not permit the private ownership of firearms. Totalitarian governments that have been taught in their high school civics classes do not trust the citizens and dare not permit them to keep firearms. Thus, one often hears the statement, the first thing the Nazis did when they came to power was outlaw firearms, or the first thing Hitler did in Germany was round up all the guns. One can understand why many American gun owners want to believe this. They see in the current effort of their own government to take away the right to keep and bear arms a limitation of an essential element of their freedom and move toward tyranny, and they want to characterize the gun grabbers in the most negative way they can. Adolf Hitler has been vilified continuously for the past 60 years at the time of this essay. I think it was 94, or 60 years or so, by the mass media in America. And certainly no politician or office holder wants to be compared with him. If the gun confiscation effort can be portrayed convincingly as something of which Hitler would have approved, it will have been effectively tarred. The identification of the inclination to deny citizens the right to keep and bear arms with National Socialism and Adolf Hitler has been strengthened recently by clever magazine advertisements which show Hitler with his arm outstretched in a Roman salute under a heading, "All in favor of gun control, raise your right hand." A Jewish group, Jews for the Preservation of Firearms, quite noisily for its size, has been especially zealous in promoting the idea that the current gun control effort in America has its roots in Germany during the Hitler period. This group has gone so far as to claim in several articles published in popular magazines read by firearm enthusiasts that the current restrictive legislation being proposed by the U.S. government is modeled on a gun control statute enacted by Germany's National Socialist government, the German Weapons Law of March 18, 1938. Now, I want to interject. Keep in mind, like I have said over and over and over again, they always blame everybody else for what it is they do. And so how many times have they collected guns before they did a takeover? And so in this instance, they're blaming Hitler. Okay, back to the essay. Again, one can underestimate the motivation. One can understand the motivation of the Jews for prevention. Jews for Preservation of Firearms Ownership. I'm just going to say JPFO. Many non-Jewish firearms owners are well aware that the movement to restrict their rights is led and promoted primarily by Jews, and anti-Jewish feeling has grown among them. They know that the controlled news media, which are almost unanimously in favor of abridging or abolishing the Second Amendment, are very much under the influence of Jews, and they know that the most vocal anti-gun legislators in Congress are also Jews. It is natural for a group such as the JPFO to mount a damage control effort in an attempt to prevent anti-Jewish feeling from becoming even stronger among gun owners. Their strategy is to deflect the blame from their kinsmen in the media and the government and direct it onto their most hated enemies, the National Socialists, or at least to create enough smoke to obscure the facts and keep the gun-owning public confused. Unfortunately, for those who would like to think Hitler and the National Socialists would like to link Hitler and the National Socialists with gun control, the entire premise for such an effort is false. German firearms legislation under Hitler, far from banning private ownership, actually facilitated the keeping and bearing of arms by German citizens by eliminating or ameliorating restrictive laws which had been enacted by the government preceding his, a left-center government which had contained a number of Jews. It is not just that the National Socialist firearms legislation was the opposite of what it has been claimed to have been by persons who want to tar modern gun grabbers with the Nazi brush. The whole spirit of Hitler's government was starkly different from its portrayal by the America's mass media. The facts in brief are these. The National Socialist government of Germany, unlike the government in Washington today, did not fear its citizens. Adolf Hitler was the most popular leader Germany ever had. Unlike American presidents, he did not have to wear body armor and have shields of bulletproof glass in front of him whenever he spoke in public. At public celebrations, he rode standing in an open car as it moved slowly through cheering crowds. Communists made several attempts to assassinate him, and his government stamped down hard on communism, virtually wiping it out in Germany. Between upright law-abiding German citizens and Adolf Hitler, however, there was a real love, with mutual respect and trust. The spirit of National Socialism was one of manliness, and individual self-defense and self-reliance were central to the National Socialist view of the way a citizen should behave. The notion of banning firearms ownership was utterly alien to National Socialism. In the German universities where National Socialism gained its earliest footholds, and which later became its strongest bastions, dueling was an accepted practice. Although the liberal Jewish governments in Germany after the First War attempted to ban dueling, it persisted illegally until it was again legalized by the National Socialists. Fencing, target shooting, and other martial arts were immensely popular in Germany, and the National Socialists encouraged young Germans to become proficient in these activities, believing they were important for the development of a man's character. Gun registration and licensing for long guns as well as for handguns were legislated by an anti-National Socialist government in Germany in 1928, 5 years before the National Socialists gained power. Hitler became chancellor on January 30th, 1933. 5 years later, his government got around to rewriting the gun laws enacted a decade earlier by his predecessors, substantially ameliorating it in the process. For example, long guns were exempted from the requirements for a purchase permit. The legal age for gun ownership was lowered from 20 to 18. The period of validity of a permit to carry weapons was extended from 1 to 3 years, and provisions restricting the amount of ammunition or the number of firearms an individual could own were dropped. Hitler's government may be criticized for leaving certain restrictions and licensing requirements in the law, but the National Socialists had no intention of preventing law-abiding Germans from keeping or bearing arms. Again, the firearms law enacted by Hitler's government enhanced the rights of Germans to keep and bear arms. No new restrictions were added, and many pre-existing restrictions were relaxed or eliminated. At the end of the Second War, American GIs and the occupying force were astounded to discover how many German civilians owned private firearms. Tens of thousands of pistols looted from German homes by GIs were brought back to the United States after the war. In 1945, Eisenhower ordered all privately owned firearms in the American occupation zone of Germany confiscated, and Germans were required to hand in their shotguns and rifles as well as any handguns which had not already been stolen. In the Soviet occupation zone, German civilians were summarily shot if they were found in possession of even a single cartridge. Jews, it should be noted, were not Germans, even if they had been born in Germany. The National Socialists defined citizenship in ethnic terms, and under Hitler, Jews were not accorded full rights of citizenship. National Socialist legislation progressively excluded Jews from key professions, teaching, the media, the practice of law, etc. The aim was not only to free German life from an impressive and degenerative Jewish influence, but to persuade Jews to immigrate. The Germans' weapons law of March 18, 1938, specifically excluded Jews from manufacturing or dealing in firearms or munitions, but it did not exclude them from owning or bearing personal firearms. The exclusion of Jews from the firearms business rankled them as much as any other exclusion, and in their typically ethnocentric fashion, they have misrepresented the law involved as an anti-gun law in an effort to cast their enemies in a bad light. I'm going to take a drink of water. It should also be noted in passing that the restrictions placed on Jews by the National Socialists had the intended effect. Between 1933 and 1939, two-thirds of the Jews residing in Germany immigrated, reducing the Jewish population of the country from 600,000 when Hitler became chancellor in 1933 to 200,000 at the outbreak of the Second War in 1939. Jews in the United States, looking at this period from their own narrowly focused viewpoint, have described these peacetime years of the National Socialist government as a time of darkness, terror, and regression, whereas for the German people, it was a time of hope, joy, and spiritual material renewal. Much of the same type of distortion is seen in the portrayal of the United States in the early 1950s, the so-called McCarthy era. Senator Joseph McCarthy, Republican from Wisconsin, used his position as chairman of the Senate's Government Operations Committee to expose the widespread communist infiltration of the U.S. government and the other U.S. institutions which had taken place during the Second World War. A substantial majority of the communists who were dragged reluctantly out into the light of day by his efforts were Jews. As a result, the controlled media always have portrayed the period as one of terror and repression, when everyone was frightened of Senator McCarthy's witch hunt. Of course, it was nothing of the sort to Jewish non-Americans, who were not intimidated in the least. History viewed through a Jewish lens, i.e., through media controlled by Jews, always is distorted in a way corresponding to Jewish interests and concerns. Both the German weapons law of March 18, 1938, enacted by the National Socialists, and the law on firearms and ammunition of April 12, 1928, was enacted by an anti-National Socialist government, are always given below in this essay in full, first in facsimile and then in English translation. A little background information first, however, may help the reader to understand their significance. After Germany's defeat in the First War, a defeat in which Germany's Jews played no small part, demoralizing the home front with demonstrations and other subversive activity, much as they did in America during the Vietnam War, the Kaiser abdicated and liberals and leftists seized control of the government in 1918. Hitler, recovering in a military hospital from a British poison gas attack, which had blinded him temporarily, made the decision to go into politics and fight against the traitors he felt were responsible for Germany's distress. The tendency of Germany's new rulers after the First World War was much the same as it is for the liberals in America today. They promoted cosmopolitanism, internationalism, and egalitarianism. By 1923, economic conditions in Germany had become catastrophic, and there was much public unrest. The communists had made major inroads into the labor movement and were a growing threat to the country. Hitler had indeed gone into politics, and his National Socialists battled the communists in the streets of Germany's cities, and gradually came to be seen by many patriotic Germans in the working class and the middle class as the only force which could save Germany from a communist takeover and total ruin. Hitler's National Socialists continued to win recruits and gain strength during the 1920s. The communists, with aid from the Soviet Union, also continued to grow. The political situation became increasingly unstable as the government lost popular support. The government's response was to substantially tighten up restrictions on the rights of German citizens to keep and bear arms. The law on firearms and ammunition of April 12, 1928, was the most substantial effort in this regard. This law was enacted by a left-center government hostile to the National Socialists. The government was headed by Chancellor Wilhelm Marx and consisted of a coalition of socialists, including many Jews and Catholic centrists. 5 years later, in 1933, the National Socialists were in power. Hitler headed the government, and the communist threat was crushed decisively. The National Socialists began undoing the social and economic damage done by their predecessors. Germany was restored to full employment. Degeneracy and corruption were rooted out. Jews and their collaborators were removed from one facet of national life after another, and the German people entered a new era of national freedom, health, and prosperity. Finally, in 1938, the National Socialist government got around to enacting a new firearms law to replace the one enacted by their opponents 10 years earlier. The highlights of the 1938 law, especially as it applied to ordinary citizens rather than manufacturers or dealers, are as follows. And these are just the main points here. Let me take a drink of water real quick. Handguns may be purchased only on submission of a weapons acquisition permit, which must be used within 1 year from the date of issue. Muzzle-loading handguns are exempted from permit requirement. The 1928 law had required a permit for the purchase of long guns as well, but the National Socialists dropped this requirement. Holders of a permit to carry weapons or of a hunting license do not need a weapons acquisition permit in order to acquire a handgun. A hunting license authorizes its bearers to carry hunting weapons and handguns. Firearms and ammunition, as well as swords and knives, may not be sold to minors under the age of 18. The age limit had been 20 in the 1928 law. Whoever carries a firearm outside of his dwelling, his place of employment, his place of business, or his fenced property must have on his person a weapons permit. A permit is not required, however, for carrying a firearm for use at police-approved shooting range. A person a permit to acquire a handgun or to carry firearms may only be issued to persons whose trustworthiness is not in question and who can show a need for a permit. In particular, a permit may not be issued to a person under the age of 18, legally incompetent or mentally retarded persons, gypsies or vagabonds, persons under mandatory police supervision such as parole or the situations where they're temporarily without their civil rights, persons convicted of treason or high treason or known to be engaged in activities hostile to the state, or persons who for assault, trespass, or breach of the peace, resistance to authority, a criminal offense or misdemeanor, or a hunting or fishing violation were legally sentenced to a term of imprisonment of more than 2 weeks if 3 years had not passed since the term of imprisonment. The manufacturing, sale, carrying, possession, and import of the following are prohibited: trick firearms designed so as to conceal their function, like a cane gun or a belt buckle pistol, or any firearm equipped with a silencer, any rifle equipped with a spotlight. Cartridges with a .22 caliber or hollow point bullets. That is the essence. Numerous other provisions of the law relate to firearms manufacturers, importers, and dealers, to acquisition and carrying of firearms by police, military, and other official personnel, to the maximum fees which can be charged for permits for 3 Reichsmarks, to tourists bringing firearms into Germany, and to the fines and other penalties to be levied for violations. The requirements of trustworthiness and proof of need when obtaining a permit are troubling, but it should be noted that they were simply carried over from the 1928 law. They were not formulated by the National Socialists. Under the National Socialists, these requirements were interpreted liberally. A person who did not fall into one of the prohibited categories listed above was considered trustworthy, and a statement such as, "I often carry sums of money," was accepted as proof of need. The prohibitions of a spotlight-equipped rifle and hollow point .22 caliber ammunition were based on considerations that they were unsporting when used for hunting, and they were inhumane. Now read the German firearms laws for yourself, either in the original German exactly as they were published by the German government, or in the complete English translations which are provided here. What I'm going to go ahead and do here is, if you are on my list or you have requested a copy of the Martin Luther King information, since I have not sent that out yet, I will go ahead and attach this essay in PDF format in that email, which also shows a photograph of Germans standing in line with all of their weapons to turn them in to the United States government under their occupation. I'm going to go ahead and take a little break. I've got to go to the restroom, and I will be back in about 5.5 minutes. Okay, I'm back. What I've got next here, before I get into Lincoln, is something called the New Albany Declaration, and this was signed in New Albany, Mississippi in the mid-1990s, and it's sort of a manifesto of the Southern people, and I think this is actually extremely important to hear, because actually it describes the circumstances that all white people in this country are in right now, and without exception. The only thing I have any argument with in this manifesto, for the most part, is religious issues. So anyway, let me get to this, and so here we go. It's called the New Albany Declaration. All the natural world is based on loyalty to hearth and kin, yet in the West, historical regard for the integrity of distinct peoples and cultures is being submerged in a multicultural melting pot. It will, if carried to its logical conclusion, overwhelm peoples of European descent. By subverting natural affinities, those in power commit the crime of genocide against Western peoples. It is the natural right of all peoples to seek their own survival and safety. Given the pace at which changes are unfolding, it has become necessary to seek political solutions that would have hitherto been unthinkable. That is, the irrevocable separation of threatened peoples from governing bodies that no longer further their safety and well-being. No distinct people is more threatened than the European-derived peoples who constitute the American South. In 1861, the United States government waged a war of destruction and annihilation against the Southern people, a war provoked in part by abolitionists who agitated ceaselessly for destruction of Southern whites by military force and armed servile insurrection. This call for their own murder met the only response any sane people could make. The Southern people fought back, surrendering only when the weight of the invader became more than life itself could bear. While the factors influencing the political climate have changed in the intervening century, nevertheless, it is self-evident that Abraham Lincoln's war of aggression against people of his own blood and for the benefit of those of another descent is now being reenacted throughout the West. Now, this presumes Lincoln is white. Excuse me. By such means are proud and brave people brought to ruin. Indeed, the situation today is far worse because it afflicts all of the West. Nowhere in the civilized world is there sanctuary from the dissolutive multicultural tendencies inflicted in 1865 only on the South. If we are to survive, this spiritual malignancy cannot stand. We, the Southern people, are resolved that, whatever the risk to ourselves, we must take those steps necessary to secure the existence of our people and a future for our children. And therefore, and to that end, in the 131st year of our physical and spiritual occupation by the United States government, we, the unreconstructed Southern people, do proclaim the following. I need to cough. Number one, we are a Christian people of Northwest European descent with predominantly Anglo-Celtic institutions, traditions, culture, and heritage. Wherever we may abide, we are bound by blood, loyalty, and sentiment to the American South, comprising of Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisiana, Maryland, Mississippi, Missouri, North Carolina, Oklahoma, South Carolina, Tennessee, Texas, and Virginia. That our historical and cultural identity was forged over a 400-year period of exploration, settlement, and endeavor that created our distinct character, dialects, folkways, values, and civilization. The war for Southern independence was a crucible that transformed us into a people with a single purpose and destiny. That we have an unalienable right to self-determination and to continued existence as a distinct people. These unalienable rights were bought with courage, tenacity, and sacrifice of our ancestors who fought and died in the war for Southern independence, the American Revolution, and in every American conflict where duty's call beckoned. That the ideas of liberty and sovereignty undergirding America's founding were in large measure given voice by the genius and resolve of Southern statesmen. The transcendent principles they embraced, codified in the Virginia Declaration of Rights, the Declaration of Independence, and the Bill of Rights, have served as an enduring inspiration to all people who aspire to self-government. That no power on earth is morally justified in depriving our people or our posterity of safety, independence, or substance. To this end, separation and independent nationhood are morally just measures for securing the safety of a free people. That the hallowed battlefields and cemeteries of 1861 through 1865 bear silent witness to the destruction wrought by the United States government in league with northern financial interests and social radicals for the purpose of subjugating and obliterating the Southern people, to wit, abolition, aggression, conquest, disenfranchisement, reconstruction, and amalgamation. That during the military occupation called Reconstruction, the South endured destructive physical, economic, and social depredations by carpetbaggers, scalawags, and freedmen. Reconstruction ended not because of federal benevolence, but by the indomitable resistance of the Southern people to their own disposition, despite which the federal government continued its policy of economic exploitation until World War II, keeping much of the South in unrelieved poverty. Cough. That we, as well as all Americans of European descent, are suffering a second, more terrible Reconstruction, one that began in the late 1940s with the schism in the Democratic Party over the civil rights plank that escalated with the Brown School desegregation decision of 1954, and that achieved dominance with the Civil Rights Act of 1964 and the Voting Rights Act of 1965. That the moral and societal dissolution engendered by this second Reconstruction was thrust on us through propaganda, deceit, and force of arms by adherents of the Marxist, universalist ideology known as liberalism, an ideology alien to the Southern people, contrary to God's laws and destructive of all who are deceived by it. That the tidal wave of third world immigration unleashed during this second Reconstruction imperils not only our right of self-government, but our continued biological existence, as indeed it imperils all Western peoples. That in furtherance of the illusion of a multicultural Tower of Babel, an unholy alliance of government, media, and, regrettably, Christian churches in error are directing a relentless campaign of slander and abasement against our institutions, traditions, symbols, and history through destructive laws, dishonest reporting, and teaching of false universalist doctrines. That the assertion of equality among races, sexes, and moral belief systems is contradicted by every shred of natural evidence. As a people, we condemn interracial unions because they are destroying our society and our people's very existence. That much of the subjugation of the Southern people has been fostered by weak or inept Southern leaders who, due to venality, cowardice, or lack of vision, refuse to confront the hard choices needed to preserve our heritage and our children's future. That, as Southerners, we affirm our faith in and devotion to God, family, and country, and to the traditions that have sustained our people for uncounted generations. Southern ideas of honor, chivalry, courage, and discipline are timeless virtues, unchanged by the decadence of the modern age. While respecting freedom of conscience, we are a Christian people with Christian institutions. That we believe equality is a sworn enemy of liberty, and we recognize the natural hierarchical social order and adhere to a political system in which the best members of society are enabled to rise to positions of leadership and civic duty. That the agrarian origin of the Southern people confers a deep affection for nature and for the land. Responsible stewardship over nature's bounty has ever been the duty of all Southerners. Excuse me. That we respect traditional Southern social norms defining the role of the family, the relationships between men and women, and the ideas of Southern manhood and Southern womanhood. That we have a long and distinguished martial tradition that precludes soldiery participation by women or other races. That kindred folk who marry into Southern families and adopt Southern ideas and traditions may become naturalized Southerners. We welcome kindred folk who, without benefit of family ties, adopt the Southern way of life. Conversely, Southern nativity alone does not confer Southern nationality. That while maintaining the integrity of Southerners as a distinct people and culture, we seek renewed fraternal ties with kindred peoples and friendly relations with all people of goodwill. That we shall never accept the defeat of the Confederacy, the subjugation of our people, nor the eradication of our symbols as the final judgment of history, nor shall we accept alien domination of Southern churches, schools, media, commerce, industry, government, or through these institutions, alien control of Southern life. That defense and preservation of Southern symbols, monuments, relics, and history are sacred charges to every Southerner. In defense of this heritage, no honorable retreat or compromise is possible. That the Confederate battle flag is the banner of the Southern people and stands preeminent as the most powerful symbol of liberty and Southern nationhood in a constellation of venerable Southern symbols. Dixie is the anthem of that nation, that we shall stand when it is played and sing it with boldness and pride. Those who love the South are committed to the health and prosperity of its people, the rejuvenation of its culture, the unbiased recording of its history, and the lifting of occupation and control of the South by non-Southerners. That we pledge our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor to the creation of a secure homeland for our people and a future for our children, and we shall use all moral means consistent with the right of self-preservation to achieve that end. That true Southerners, like our unreconstructed Confederate ancestors, have an abiding faith in the providence and the rightness of the Southern cause, and that we do affirm that faith by adherence to the principles of this declaration, signed on the 12th day of October, 1996, in New Albany, Mississippi. I'm going to take a break from my voice before I get into the Lincoln issues. For some reason, I'm having a little bit of trouble with my voice tonight. So I'm going to play a song here real quick, see if I can recoup a little bit. And the first time I heard this song, I was probably in my early teens. Now, I don't agree with the politics of the person who is singing it, but I like it better than any of the other versions out there that I've heard. So anyway, this is real short.
Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. What kind of a peace do I mean, and what kind of a peace do we seek? Not a Pax Americana, enforced on the world by American weapons of war. Not the peace of the grave or the security of the slave. I am talking about genuine peace, the kind of peace that makes life on earth worth living, the kind that enables men and nations to grow and to hope and build a better life for their children. Not merely peace for Americans, but peace for all men and women. Not merely peace in our time, but peace in all time. The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war. We do not want a war. We do not now expect a war. This generation of Americans has already had enough, more than enough, of war and hate and oppression. We shall be prepared if others wish it. We shall be alert to try to stop it. But we shall also do our part to build a world of peace where the weak are safe and the strong are just. We are not helpless before that task or hopeless of its success. Confident and unafraid, we must labor on, not towards a strategy of annihilation, but towards a strategy of peace. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolution inevitable. 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 Inevitable.
Okay, I'm back. Well, looking at the time, I can tell you I'm not going to get through this tonight. but I do want to go ahead and get started, and thus I will continue on in the next show with it. But I think this is important because if you look back at our past history and what all has happened, and you look at the current conditions, and the fact that George Bush Jr. said that Abraham Lincoln was his favorite president, and that the current so-called president also has an affinity to this man, then I think this is actually important. I also believe that our Constitution needs to be discarded and a new one implemented, but in the meantime, this is what is on file at the county courthouse. Okay? So until that changes, this is what we have. Now, I recommend two books. One is called The South Was Right, and you can do a search for it in the net, probably find it. Another one is called In the Course of Human Events. Now, there is a textbook that is called When in the Course of Human Events. It is not that. It is just called In the Course of Human Events. I highly recommend reading those books. There was, at the time of the adoption of the Constitution, several states also had provided provisions that would allow them to leave the Union if they chose to do so. During the War of 1812, some of those same states threatened to leave the Union. When Texas was annexed, then those same states also threatened to leave the Union then as well. And so it's highly ironic that when some states finally do decide to leave the Union, they get invaded militarily. And even what's more ironic is that the man who led this invasion also, 10 years earlier, pronounced that he believed in the Declaration of Independence that a people had a right to overthrow a government that was tyrannical over them and create a new one. So what I have here, this is a speech actually, a written essay that was read at a speech. And it was goes back into the early 90s. And it's well written, and it really covers a lot of the issues. And I'll see if I can read to the end of the show here without any issues with my voice. I think there was some improvement made in the last break. So anyway, let me dive into it. And this is called An Analysis of President Lincoln's Legal Arguments Against Secession. And I will also send this out after my next show. Not this one. On May 27th, 1861, the Army of the United States of America, also called the Union, a nation formed by consecutive secessions, first from Great Britain in 1776, and then from itself in 1788, invaded the state of Virginia, which had recently seceded from the Union, in an effort to negate that secession by violent force. The historical result of this effort, begun that day, is well known and indisputable. After 4 years of brutal warfare, which killed 620,000 Americans, the United States negated the secession of the Confederate States of America and forcibly re-enrolled them into the Union, and I'm interjecting here, all as puppet governments. The Civil War ended slavery, left the South in economic ruins, and set the stage for 12 years of military rule there. And I'm going to interject here. So if you think it can't happen here, think again. It already happened once. Beyond its immediate effects, the Civil War made drastic changes in politics and law that continue to shape our world 130 years later. Arthur Eckrich writes, quote, along with the terrible destruction of life and property suffered in 4 long years of fighting, went tremendous changes in American life and thought, especially a decline in classical liberalism on all questions save that of slavery. Through a policy of arbitrary arrest made possible by Lincoln's suspension of habeas corpus, persons were seized and confined on the suspicion of disloyalty or of sympathy with the Southern cause. Thus, in the course of the Civil War, a total of 13,000 civilians was estimated to have been held as political prisoners, often without any sort of trial or after only cursory hearings before a military tribunal, end quote. The Civil War caused and allowed a tremendous expansion of the size and power of the federal government. It gave us our first federal conscription law, first progressive income tax, first enormous standing army. It gave us a higher tariff and greenbacks. James McPherson writes approvingly, "This astonishingly blitz of laws did more to reshape the relation of the government to the economy than any comparable effort except perhaps the first 100 days of the New Deal." This Civil War legislation created the blueprint for modern America. Albert J. Nock was more critical of the war's impact, especially on the Constitution. Lincoln overruled the opinion of Chief Justice Taney that suspension of habeas corpus was unconstitutional, and in consequence the mode of the state was, until 1865, a monocratic military despotism. The doctrine of reserve powers was named up ex post facto as a justification for its acts. But as far as the intent of the Constitution is concerned, it was obviously pure invention. In fact, a very good case could be made for the assertion, that Lincoln's acts resulted in permanent radical change in the entire system of constitutional interpretation. That since his time, interpretations have not been interpretations of the Constitution, but merely of public policy. A strict constitutionalist might indeed say that the Constitution died in 1861, and one would have to scratch one's head pretty diligently to refute him. This paper will attempt to explore Nock's thesis by examining the central constitutional issue of the war. Was the Union's invasion of the Confederacy a lawful act? This will be done primarily by analyzing the legal arguments made by Lincoln in support of the invasion and against the Confederate secession. This method is justified by several facts. First, the invasion of the Confederacy was ordered by Lincoln. Second, Lincoln was one of the most brilliant lawyers of his era. I don't buy that in the least. It is thus safe to assume that his legal argument in support of the invasion was of the highest quality. Third, it is likely that Lincoln read, thought, wrote, and spoke about the legal issues involving the Civil War more so than any other pro-Union lawyer of his era. He was aware of the pro-Union arguments made by his predecessors and contemporaries. Finally, Lincoln, a superb writer and speaker, had strong incentive to make his views against secession known to the American people to secure their support for the onerous war his opposition to accession made necessary. From the above facts, we conclude that if the invasion of the Confederacy was legally justified, that legal justification is to be found primarily in the writings and pronouncements of Lincoln. This paper will not address the morality of the Union's invasion of the Confederacy except indirectly and only to the extent that certain moral principles were undoubtedly reflected in the framework of laws governing the Union in 1861. Thus, whether the Union's invasion of the Confederacy can be morally justified, even if found to be unlawful, will not be answered here. It is the case, however, that the officials who launched the invasion, especially Lincoln, made no such argument in 1861. He had previously indicated his views on that issue by criticizing John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry. The issue of the right of a state to secede is of more than historical interest. Since the end of the war in 1865, though several amendments giving the federal government greater power over the states have been ratified, there have been no textual changes to the Constitution which explicitly prohibit secession. There was no attempt by either side in the Civil War to resort to federal courts or international arbitrators for a decision on the legality of secession, nor has any state attempted to secede since the Civil War. And by the way, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy and Mexican War hero, also asserted that at some point in the future that states' rights in secession would again become an issue. I agree with that statement. Continued. As settled as secession may be as a political or historical issue to many, it has never been settled as a legal one. The recent revival of secession talk in practice worldwide makes the present undertaking a valuable one. Was the invasion justified by the seizure of Fort Sumter? In the context of a legal analysis of state secession, it was the Union's invasion of Virginia that is significant, and not the Confederacy's firing on Fort Sumter a month earlier. The Confederacy fired on Fort Sumter to expel what it believed were trespassers on South Carolina soil and territorial waters. By no means can the seizure of the fort be construed as a threat to the security of the states remaining in the Union, the closest of which was 500 miles away. If South Carolina illegally seceded from the Union, then both the Union's initial refusal to surrender Fort Sumter and its subsequent invasion were lawful and constitutional. Conversely, if South Carolina had the right to secede from the Union, then indeed the Union soldiers in the fort were trespassers and also a potential military threat to South Carolina. Thus, assuming the right of secession existed, the Union had no right to retaliate or initiate war against the Confederacy. Its subsequent invasion of Virginia then marks the beginning of its illegal war on the Confederacy. The incident at Fort Sumter is largely significant as a political victory for the Union. Lincoln, while holding a hostile military force on Southern soil, was able to outmaneuver the Confederacy into firing the first shot of the war. That such a shot would be fired, however, was guaranteed by President Lincoln when he disingenuously announced that in his inaugural address that there shall be no violence unless it be forced upon the national authority. He then defined the term national authority in such a way as to inspire that war would come. Quote, "The power confided in me will be used to hold, occupy, and possess the property and places belonging to the government and to collect the duties and imposts. But beyond what may be necessary for those objects, there will be no invasion, no using of force, or among the people anywhere." End quote. Whatever one's views, legal, political, or moral, about the Civil War or Lincoln, it should be obvious that Lincoln was being dishonest here. He was suggesting he would not resist secession, but would continue to tax the seceders and hold hostile military installations on their property. An absurdity. Before becoming president, Lincoln had been more honest. He simply said, "We won't let you secede." The truth is, the southern states wanted to go in peace, but Lincoln wouldn't let them. Now, let me interject what Robert E. Lee's thoughts were on this. Robert E. Lee basically suggested that all the South was fighting for was to be independent and to preserve the original form of government. Now, this clearly means not the one that they intended to impose upon the country at that time. Now, I'm not going to make a statement either way about my thoughts on how the existing Constitution, if it were being operated properly, or the way it's being run now, would be something to return to or not, or create another one, which in some ways might even resemble what we have now to a certain extent, but only to a certain extent. That's not the issue of what this is. What this is all about what is on file in the county courthouse. Okay. Now, we're getting close to the end of the show here. I'm going to find a cutoff point, and we'll pick up next week. So let me try to get in as much as I can here. In his July 4th, 1861 address to Congress, President Lincoln called the doctrine of the secessionists an insidious debauching of the public mind. They invented, he said, an ingenious sophism which, if conceded, was followed by perfectly logical steps through all the incidents to the complete destruction of the Union. The sophism itself is that any state of the Union may, consistently with the national constitution, and therefore lawfully and peacefully withdraw from the Union without the consent of the Union or of any other state. Ironically, it was not fire-eating Southern rebels who had originated this sophism, but the man Lincoln called the most distinguished politician in our history, a man named Thomas Jefferson. Jefferson, who called Virginia his country, planted the seeds of secession doctrine with his Kentucky Resolution of 1798, written in protest to the Alien and Sedition laws. The several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their government. And that's this quote, by the way. I'll start over. The several states composing the United States of America are not united on the principle of unlimited submission to their general government. And by the way, that is how we always referred to what we now call the federal government. It was the general government. That is the proper terminology. But that, by compact, under the style and title of the Constitution of the United States, and of certain amendments thereto, they constituted a general government for general purposes, delegated to that government certain powers, reserving each state to itself the residuary mass of right to their own self-government, and that whensoever the general government assumes undelegated powers, its acts are unauthoritative, void, and of no effect, close quote. Now, we've got about 4 minutes or so I'm going to go ahead and stop at that point. And this is not going to drag on the way the Martin Luther King thing did. And if my voice does better next week than it did in the first part of the show, then I'll knock out the rest of it fairly quickly. So anyway, let me bring my note page up here. So again, what happens if we don't prevail over these tyrants? And I'm going to close with some usual final thoughts. The fact that they want our guns is all the more reason to have them. There are no illegal guns, only illegal gun laws. Anti-gun is anti-white. Anti-Semitism is a disease. You catch it from Jews. Free men aren't equal, and equal men aren't free. Odin demands that you grow the fuck up. Distinct peoples have a right to remain distinct. Multiracialism is not self-government. Forced association isn't freedom. 1488. So until next time, hail Satan, and we'll close out with some Bachman Turner Overdrive.